The courtroom fell silent as the medical examiner began his testimony. What he was about to reveal would be so disturbing, so unbearable, that seasoned law enforcement officers would later admit they struggled to sleep that night. The judge would eventually call for an emergency recess, something almost unheard of in capital murder trials. 6-year-old Emma had trusted him, called him Uncle Zach. He was a neighbor who helped watch her when her mom worked late shifts. He was supposed to keep her safe. But on November 20th, 2011, in a quiet Arkansas neighborhood, Emma vanished from her bed in the middle of the night. Her mother woke to find empty sheets where her daughter should have been sleeping. Within hours, police would make a discovery 2 doors down that would shatter an entire community. What happened in those dark hours? How did a trusted neighbor become a monster? And why did the evidence presented in court prove so horrific that even hardened professionals had to look away? This is a story about the fragility of trust, the vulnerability of innocence, and the devastating moment when evil walks through an unlocked door. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. By the time you finish this story, you'll understand why this case became one of the most emotionally devastating trials in Arkansas history. But first, consider these questions. How does a 6-year-old girl disappear from her own bedroom in the middle of the night without anyone hearing a sound? Why did the neighbor who reported being sick at 3:35 a.m. become the prime suspect just days later? And what evidence emerged during the autopsy that was so conclusive, so undeniable, that even the defense attorneys couldn't argue innocence? The answers lie in a timeline that spans just a few hours, in a neighborhood where everyone knew everyone, and in the devastating realization that sometimes the greatest danger comes from those we trust most. This case will expose failures in the child welfare system, reveal the hidden trauma that can create a predator, and ultimately ask the hardest question of all. Could this have been prevented? Bentonville, Arkansas. Population just over 35,000. The kind of place where neighbors still wave to each other, where kids ride bicycles down quiet streets, and where people genuinely believe in the goodness of their community. This isn't a big city where crime feels inevitable. This is the heartland. The natural state, a place defined by the Ozark Mountains, clear rivers, and that distinctive sense of safety that comes with small-town American life. Southeast 8th Street looked like any other street in Bentonville. Modest homes, chain-link fences, kids' toys scattered in yards. The kind of street where people help each other out, where borrowing sugar from a neighbor isn't unusual, and where watching someone's kids feels like just being a good neighbor. But beneath that surface of normalcy, multiple stories were quietly unfolding. Stories that would eventually collide in the most tragic way possible. Emma's story. Emma Miller had already survived more in her 6 years than most children ever face. Her earliest years were marked by something no child should experience. Her biological father, David, and his wife, Jana, had subjected her to conditions that authorities would later describe as dangerous and cruel. Emma had been forced to sleep on the floor, physically restrained to prevent her from moving freely during the night. When she finally found the courage to tell a child care professional what was happening, everything changed. The investigation moved quickly. Both David and Jana were arrested. David eventually pleaded guilty to multiple charges of child endangerment and was sentenced to 18 years in prison. Jana received 12 years, plus an additional 3 for violating probation. Emma never returned to that house. She went to live permanently with her biological mother, Sarah, and for the first time in her young life, she experienced what stability felt like. By 2012, Emma seemed to be thriving. She was enrolled in kindergarten at Sugar Creek Elementary. Teachers describe her as incredibly sweet, always smiling, with an infectious laugh that could light up a room. She adored her role as big sister to 2-year-old Lily, and despite everything she'd been through, she radiated joy. "I don't know how she got through it," one family friend later recalled, "but she did, and she kept smiling." In March 2012, Sarah and her daughters moved into a home at 608 Southeast 8th Street. It felt like a fresh start, a chance to leave the past behind and build something stable, something safe. Next door, at 702 Southeast 8th Street, lived the Holloways, Amanda and Zachary, the neighbors. Amanda, and Sarah quickly became close friends. They were both young mothers navigating life's challenges, both trying to build better futures for their children. They spent time together, supported each other, and genuinely enjoyed each other's company. Zachary seemed like a regular guy. He worked at a local restaurant, lived a low-profile life, and was generally friendly with the neighbors. He and Amanda often helped watch Emma and Lily when Sarah worked late shifts, an arrangement that felt natural and neighborly. Emma trusted him enough to call him Uncle Zach. But Zachary's past told a different story, one that most neighbors didn't know. His childhood had been marked by severe instability. His mother struggled with addiction for years, creating an environment of neglect and insecurity. Records would later show that child welfare services had investigated his family 15 times. 15 separate reports of concerning conditions. He'd lived in 9 different homes growing up, attended 23 different schools, never experiencing consistency, never learning what safety truly felt like. He'd had minor run-ins with law enforcement before, nothing violent, nothing that screamed danger, but enough to create a record, enough to show a pattern of poor judgment and boundary issues. Still, none of that was obvious to the neighbors on Southeast A Street. To them, Zachary was just Amanda's husband, the guy who helped out, someone they saw every day, someone who seemed harmless. The arrangement, the babysitting arrangement had become routine. When Sarah worked evening shifts, Emma and Lily would stay with the Holloways. It wasn't formal childcare. It was just neighbors helping neighbors. The kind of thing that happens every day in communities across America. No one thought twice about it. Emma was comfortable there. She knew Amanda. She knew Zachary. She'd been there many times before. There was no reason to worry. Or so everyone thought. November 19th, 2011. The evening of November 19th started like any other. Sarah had a shift that ran late into the night. Her boyfriend Brandon was also working. The arrangement was familiar. Emma and Lily would stay with the Holloways until Sarah got home. Around 11 p.m., Sarah returned from work. She walked next door to pick up her daughters. Emma was sleepy. Lily was already out cold in her arms. They said their goodbyes and headed home. The short walk between houses took less than a minute. Inside their home, Sarah got both girls ready for bed. They shared a bed that night, just as they often did. Emma was drifting off when she suddenly looked up at her mother. "I love you to the moon and back," she whispered. It was their phrase. The way Emma always expressed her love. "I love you to the moon and back too, sweetheart," Sarah replied. Those were the last words they would ever exchange. According to his later statement, Zachary woke up around 3:35 in the morning feeling ill. He claimed he had severe stomach pain and didn't want to wake Amanda, so he decided to walk to the nearby convenience store, Easy Mart, about 150 yards away. Surveillance footage would later confirm he was there at that time, purchasing medication for an upset stomach. He returned home, he said, and went straight back to bed. But something else happened during those dark hours. Something he wouldn't initially tell anyone about. Sarah woke early on the morning of November 20th. It was a normal Sunday morning, 6 days after Emma's 6th birthday. She walked into the bedroom to check on the girls. Lily was there, still sleeping peacefully. Emma's side of the bed was empty. Sarah's heart rate immediately spiked. She called out Emma's name. No response. She checked the bathroom. Empty. The living room. Empty. The kitchen. Empty. Every room in the house. Calling her daughter's name, her voice rising with each passing second. Nothing. Sarah called her mother, her voice shaking. Emma's gone. I can't find Emma. Together, they searched everywhere a 6-year-old might hide. Under beds, in closets, behind furniture, in cabinets. Emma was nowhere. That's when Sarah looked out the window and saw Amanda sitting on her porch. She ran over. "Have you seen Emma?" Amanda's face went pale. "No, I haven't seen her." The fear that had been building in Sarah's chest exploded into full panic. At 6:43 a.m., the call went out to 911. Bentonville 911. What's the address of your emergency? It's 608 Southeast A Street. Sarah could barely speak through her tears. Amanda had to take the phone to give the dispatcher the information. A 6-year-old girl was missing. When a child goes missing, law enforcement doesn't wait. Every minute matters. Every second could be the difference between life and death. Officers arrived within minutes. They immediately began searching Sarah's home, going through every room with systematic precision. They checked the yard, the surrounding properties, interviewed neighbors. No sign of Emma. They went to the Holloway house next door and searched there too. Still nothing. But as Officer Travis Nichols walked the perimeter of the neighborhood, something caught his attention. House 704, 2 doors down from where Emma lived, appeared abandoned. And unlike the other houses, its back door was standing open. He approached with Officer Mike Henson. They looked inside. The house appeared empty, with just some scattered trash on the floor. It was quiet, too quiet. They entered slowly, clearing each room. When they reached the bedroom, Officer Nichols stopped. There was a person lying on the floor. Even from the doorway, he could tell something was terribly wrong. They immediately backed out of the house and secured the scene. By this point, family members were arriving. Emma's grandmother, Victoria, approached one of the officers. She could see it in his face. The shock, the devastation. "Is it Emma?" she asked quietly. He couldn't answer. He just looked at her. Victoria would later say that in that moment, she knew. She knew before anyone said the words. Emma Miller was found in the bedroom of the abandoned house at 704 Southeast A Street, just 2 doors down from her own home. The scene was immediately secured. Crime scene tape went up. The street was blocked off. Within hours, the FBI was contacted, and the Arkansas State Crime Lab was put on notice. This was no longer a missing child case. This was a homicide investigation. Emma's maternal grandfather was given the devastating task of formally identifying her body for the family. It was a moment that would haunt him forever. Outside, the neighborhood transformed into a crime scene. Television cameras arrived. Reporters set up. Neighbors stood on their porches, whispering, trying to understand what happened just steps from their own homes. In front of Emma's house sat her small bicycle, as if waiting for her to come back and ride it. Nearby was a deflated balloon with princesses on it, a remnant from her recent birthday party. These small details, these innocent objects, stood in stark contrast to the horror unfolding around them. Sarah was being interviewed by Detective Corporal J.C. Wisman, who carefully reconstructed the timeline. She explained that she'd put Emma to bed around 11:30 p.m. She checked on her around 6:38 a.m., and Emma was gone. She hadn't heard anything unusual during the night. No sounds, no disturbances, nothing that would have indicated something was wrong. There were no signs of forced entry at their home, no broken windows, no kicked-in doors. So how did Emma end up 2 houses away? What happened during those dark hours between midnight and dawn? And who was responsible? If you're still watching at this point, drop a comment with your city and state. Let's see how many people are following this story from across the country. Within hours of discovering Emma's body, Bentonville Police Chief John Simpson held a press conference. His face was grim. His words were measured. But the message was clear. This was a homicide, and they would find whoever was responsible. "The neighborhood here is really shaken up about this," one reporter said, standing in front of the crime scene. "The girl's body was found inside an abandoned house behind me." The local school district immediately mobilized crisis counselors. Teachers at Sugar Creek Elementary faced the impossible task of explaining to kindergartners that their classmate Emma wasn't coming back. Principal Pam Blair later described how they broke the news to the students. "We didn't provide much information other than the facts. That Emma had died, and police were investigating. Children were allowed to draw pictures and write about their feelings. It was a way to process grief that young minds couldn't fully comprehend. 35 to 40 students needed intensive counseling. The older kids, 3rd and 4th graders who better understood death, had the hardest time. Meanwhile, the FBI joined the investigation. When a child is murdered, every resource gets deployed. Agents began running background checks, interviewing anyone who'd had contact with Emma, collecting DNA samples from neighbors and anyone who might be connected. Chief Simpson made a public statement. "Everyone who had close contact with Emma will be thoroughly examined. We will find answers. But privately, investigators already had a theory forming. The investigation focused heavily on reconstructing the timeline of that night. 11 p.m. Sarah returns home from work and picks up Emma and Lily from the Holloways. 11:30 p.m. Both girls are put to bed. Emma tells her mother, "I love you to the moon and back." 3:35 a.m. Zachary claims he woke up feeling sick and walked to Easy Mart to buy stomach medication. Surveillance confirms he was there. 6:38 a.m. Sarah discovers Emma is missing. 6:43 a.m. 911 call is placed. That window between 11:30 p.m. and 6:38 a.m. was the key. Somewhere in those 7 hours, Emma had disappeared from her bed and ended up dead in an abandoned house. There were no signs of forced entry at Sarah's home, which meant either Emma left on her own or someone had access to the house. Someone who could enter without breaking anything. Someone familiar enough with the layout to navigate in the dark. Amanda Holloway was among the first interviewed. Her account matched Sarah's perfectly. She confirmed that she'd watched the girls that evening, that Sarah had picked them up around 11 p.m., and that she hadn't seen Emma since. When asked if she'd seen anything unusual during the night, Amanda said no. Everything had seemed normal. Zachary was also interviewed. He explained the babysitting arrangement, confirmed he'd watched the girls with Amanda that evening, and described his late-night trip to Easy Mart for medication. "I woke up around 3:35, he explained. "My stomach was killing me. I didn't want to wake Amanda, so I walked to the store to get some medicine. I came right back and went to bed." "Did you see or hear anything unusual?" investigators asked. "No, nothing." Detectives noted that Zachary seemed cooperative, almost too cooperative. He answered every question, provided details, maintained eye contact. But something felt off. The convenience store he'd gone to, Easy Mart, was the same store where Sarah had driven later that morning to tell her boyfriend Brandon that Emma was missing. That coincidence stuck in investigators' minds. While interviews continued, the Arkansas State Crime Lab worked around the clock. Even through Thanksgiving weekend, forensic technicians processed evidence from the scene. They collected biological samples, hair fibers, DNA material, anything that could identify who had been in that abandoned house with Emma. A full autopsy was performed on November 21st, just one day after Emma's body was discovered. Dr. Frank Petty, the state medical examiner, conducted the examination. What he found would become critical evidence in the case. The cause of death was asphyxiation. Emma had died from a lack of air. But there were other findings too, evidence that pointed to not just homicide, but the specific circumstances surrounding her death. Evidence that would later prove so disturbing that even seasoned professionals would struggle to discuss it. The autopsy also revealed biological evidence that could be tested for DNA. The lab put a rush on the testing. Within days, they had results. The DNA profile recovered from Emma's body matched someone in the system, someone they'd already interviewed, someone who lived right next door. 3 days after Emma's body was discovered, Zachary reached out to investigators voluntarily. He wanted to take a polygraph test. "I want to clear my name," he told Sergeant Chris Moffett. "I want you to find whoever did this." The polygraph was scheduled and administered by a certified examiner. Zachary was asked a series of questions about his whereabouts that night, his interactions with Emma, and whether he had any knowledge of what happened to her. The test took several hours. 3 days later, the results came back. Deception indicated. Zachary had failed the polygraph. But that alone wasn't enough for an arrest. Polygraph results aren't admissible in court. They're just an investigative tool. What investigators needed was something more concrete. They already had it. The DNA results from the crime lab had come back with a match. Biological evidence recovered from Emma's body was consistent with Zachary Holloway's DNA profile. The pieces were coming together. But investigators still needed a confession. They needed Zachary to tell them what happened that night. Zachary was brought back to the police station for another interview. This time, the tone was different. Detectives sat across from him in the small interrogation room. They had the DNA results. They had the failed polygraph. They had timeline inconsistencies. But they started slowly. "Zach, We need to talk about the DNA evidence. Zachary shifted in his seat. What about it? The DNA recovered from Emma's body matches your profile. Can you explain that? I don't know. Maybe from when I was watching her? I don't know how that works. The DNA wasn't from casual contact, Zach. It was biological evidence. From the crime scene. From Emma's body. The room fell silent, and the polygraph results came back. They indicated deception. Zachary's hands began to shake. He clasped them together, trying to maintain composure. I didn't do anything. I don't know what you want me to say. The detectives leaned forward. We also know details about the scene. Zach, details we haven't released to the public. Details that only the person who was there would know. They began describing specific elements of the crime scene, the positioning of Emma's body, items found near her, specific details that had been carefully withheld from all media reports. This was a strategy investigators had been planning from the beginning. Hold back critical details, then wait to see if a suspect reveals knowledge they shouldn't have. As the detectives described the scene, Zachary's face went pale. How do you know these things, Zach? These details haven't been in any news reports. The only way you could know them is if you were there. The psychological pressure was immense. Zachary was trapped. The evidence surrounded him. The walls were closing in. And then, after hours of denial, something broke. The confession. I didn't mean for this to happen. The words came out quietly, almost a whisper. The detective stayed silent, letting him continue. I went over there. After I got back from the store. I don't know why. I went to the house. Which house? Sarah's house. The door was unlocked. I went in. What did you do when you went in? Zachary's breathing became labored. His hands trembled. I went to the bedroom. Emma was there, sleeping. The detectives remained stone-faced, though inside they were reeling. What happened next, Zach? I took her. I picked her up. She didn't wake up at first. I carried her out. Where did you take her? To the empty house. 704, the abandoned one. And then what happened? This was where the confession became almost unbearable. Even the detectives, who'd seen countless terrible things, had to steel themselves for what came next. Zachary described what he'd done, the restraints he'd used, the way Emma had struggled, the awful, terrible reality of a 6-year-old child fighting for her life, while the adult she trusted as Uncle Zach took it away. The details were so specific, so consistent with the evidence, that there was no doubt. This wasn't a false confession. This was the truth. When he finished speaking, Zachary broke down completely. But the tears weren't for Emma. They were for himself, for what he knew was coming. I drew you a map, he said quietly, pulling out a piece of paper, of the house, where I left her. The sketch matched the crime scene exactly. The arrest. On November 23rd, 2011, just 3 days after Emma's body was discovered, Zachary Holloway was formally arrested. The charges were severe. Capital murder, kidnapping, residential burglary, endangering the welfare of a minor. Court documents filed by prosecutors included language that hinted at the sexual nature of the crime. Those specific details were withheld to protect the integrity of the investigation. The community's reaction was immediate and explosive. The same man who'd appeared on news broadcasts standing behind police tape, wearing a blue-striped beanie and black jacket, expressing shock and concern, was now in handcuffs. The same man who'd volunteered to take a polygraph to clear his name had been lying the entire time. The same man Emma had trusted enough to call Uncle Zach was her killer. The vigil that evening. Over 100 people gathered at the Children's Advocacy Center for a candlelight vigil. The silence was profound. Heavy. You could feel the collective grief hanging in the air. Beverly Angel, the center's executive director, spoke about Emma. There was something special about her, she said, her voice breaking. She was like this little old soul, but at the same time, just pure joy. Purple candles flickered in the darkness. Purple ribbons were tied to trees and fences throughout the neighborhood. Purple became Emma's color, a symbol of the light she brought to the world during her too short life. Parents held their children closer that night. Neighbors who'd always felt safe suddenly installed new locks. The sense of security that had defined Southeast A Street was shattered. Because if this could happen here, in this quiet neighborhood where everyone knew everyone, then it could happen anywhere. The funeral. Emma's funeral service was held at a cemetery in Bentonville. Children and staff from her daycare wore purple in her honor. Friends, family, teachers, and even law enforcement officers who'd worked the case attended to pay their respects. The funeral procession received a police escort through the city, a final gesture of respect for a little girl who'd survived so much only to have her life stolen by someone she trusted. Emma's father, David, requested temporary release from prison to attend his daughter's funeral. The request was denied. He remained in custody, serving his sentence for the abuse that had marked Emma's early years. Sarah stood at the graveside, supported by family members, as Emma's small casket was lowered into the ground. The pink bicycle from her front yard remained there for weeks afterward, slowly weathering the rain, a heartbreaking reminder of all the rides she'd never take. The trial preparation. As Zachary sat in the Benton County Jail awaiting trial, the legal machinery began to turn. Prosecutors announced they would seek the harshest possible punishment under Arkansas law. Given the nature of the crime and the age of the victim, this was a potential death penalty case. But before the trial could proceed, there were legal questions to address. Was Zachary mentally competent to stand trial? 2 independent psychiatric evaluations were ordered, one requested by the prosecution, conducted at a state medical facility, another requested by the defense, performed by a separate expert. Both evaluations reached the same conclusion. Zachary Holloway was mentally competent. He understood the charges against him. He could assist in his own defense. He knew right from wrong. There would be no insanity defense. Then came an unexpected delay. One of Zachary's public defenders filed a motion to withdraw from the case. In his statement, he explained that he was experiencing a serious psychological crisis and could not adequately represent the defendant. The admission was startling. The case was so disturbing that even the defense attorney couldn't continue. The trial was postponed while a new public defender was appointed. For Emma's family, every delay felt like another wound. More waiting, more uncertainty, more time before justice could be served. The incident in jail. Just one day before Zachary's scheduled court appearance, news broke of an incident at the county jail. During the distribution of clothing and towels, another inmate, being held for a probation violation, entered Zachary's cell. The altercation was brief. Guards responded immediately. Zachary sustained minor injuries, but nothing serious. Jail Captain Chris Stark addressed the media. This case has received huge media attention. All the inmates know why he's being held. We'll do everything we can to ensure his safety, just like we would for any other inmate. But the subtext was clear. Even among criminals, someone who hurts a child is considered the lowest of the low. The incident sparked mixed reactions in the community. Some saw it as informal justice. Others worried about vigilante violence undermining the legal system. Regardless, it underscored just how emotionally charged this case had become. The trial. When Zachary finally appeared in court, he was brought in under heavy security, dressed in standard jail clothing. He said nothing to the gathered media, kept his eyes down, avoided all eye contact. The courtroom was packed, every seat filled. Emma's family sat together, holding hands, their faces etched with grief and determination. As the prosecutor read the charges, the room fell into complete silence. Capital murder, kidnapping, residential burglary, endangering the welfare of a minor, multiple counts related to the sexual assault of a child. Zachary entered a plea of not guilty to all charges. But everyone in that courtroom knew what was coming. The testimony. The trial itself was devastating from start to finish. Dr. Frank Petty, the state medical examiner, took the stand. His testimony was clinical, professional, and absolutely heartbreaking. He explained the mechanism of Emma's death. Asphyxiation, the body's desperate struggle for air. The physiological response when breathing is restricted. First comes intense fear. Dr. Petty explained in measured tones. A powerful urge to inhale. This is followed by rapid physical exhaustion as the body fights for oxygen it cannot get. The courtroom was silent, except for quiet sobbing. Dr. Petty presented autopsy photographs to the jury. The images showed Emma's condition, the physical evidence of what had been done to her. The reaction was immediate. Jurors looked away. Several people in the gallery began crying. The weight of what they were seeing was almost unbearable. Throughout all of this, Zachary showed no visible emotion. His face remained blank, detached. Then came the DNA evidence. Lisa Channel from the Arkansas State Crime Lab explained the testing process. Hair samples recovered from the scene. Biological material collected during the autopsy. Melissa Mann, the lead forensic DNA analyst, walked the jury through the results. The DNA profile recovered from multiple samples is consistent with the defendant's DNA, she testified. I cannot say this with 100% certainty, but I can say with statistical confidence that it cannot be excluded as the source. The scientific evidence was damning, but perhaps most impactful was the audio recording of Zachary's confession played for the jury. His voice filled the courtroom, describing how he'd entered the house, how he'd taken Emma, what he'd done to her. The silence in that room was profound. The defense strategy, remarkably, the defense called no witnesses during the main phase of the trial. Even more striking, in both opening and closing statements, defense attorneys essentially acknowledged Zachary's responsibility for Emma's death. It was a strategic decision. They weren't trying to prove innocence. They were trying to avoid the death penalty. The jury deliberated briefly. The verdict, guilty on all counts. The sentencing phase. With the guilty verdict secured, the trial moved to its sentencing phase. This was where the defense made its real stand. They brought in witnesses to paint a picture of Zachary's childhood. Representatives from the California Department of Human Services testified about the conditions he'd grown up in. 15 documented child welfare investigations involving his family. 9 different homes before he turned 18. 23 different schools. A mother struggling with severe addiction who couldn't provide basic safety or stability. A DHS worker testified bluntly, "The system failed this child. We failed to protect him when he needed us most." The defense argued that Zachary was a victim too, not to excuse what he'd done, but to explain how someone becomes capable of such horror. The prosecution countered with their own evidence. Emma's life, her smile, her resilience despite her own traumatic early years, her role as a loving big sister, her joy, her potential, all of it stolen. The jury faced an impossible decision. Did Zachary's traumatic childhood justify any mercy? Or did the nature of his crime demand the ultimate punishment? After deliberations, the court delivered its sentence. 20 years for residential burglary. 2 life sentences for the charges related to sexual assault and endangering a child, and for the capital murder of Emma Miller, the death penalty. The sentence was read in complete silence. Zachary was handcuffed immediately. For the first time during the trial, he spoke. "I sincerely apologize for the pain and suffering I've caused. I hope you can one day find it in your heart to forgive me." The words rang hollow in that courtroom. Emma's family showed no reaction. Their faces were carved from stone. Whatever they felt in that moment was kept private. The appeals, Zachary's legal journey, didn't end with sentencing. From death row at the Varner Supermax Correctional Facility, he filed appeals challenging both his conviction and sentence. His first appeal argued that the judge had wrongly denied a motion for directed verdict on the burglary charge. He also claimed the jury should have been informed that he was willing to plead guilty to some charges, which could have been seen as accepting responsibility. The Arkansas Supreme Court reviewed the appeals and upheld the conviction. The verdict stood. Zachary filed another appeal, this time claiming ineffective assistance of counsel. He argued his attorneys hadn't adequately presented evidence of his psychological struggles and traumatic childhood. Again, the conviction was upheld. Each appeal meant another court proceeding, another delay, another reopening of wounds for Emma's family. Prosecutor Nathan Smith addressed the final ruling. "While further appeals are normal in cases like this, I hope today's decision reduces the likelihood that Emma's family will have to endure yet another court proceeding." David's reflection. Years after Emma's death, her biological father David gave an interview from prison. His words were heavy with regret. I never knew Zachary personally, only knew of him through others. When I found out what happened, I couldn't process it. I still can't sometimes. He paused, his voice breaking. Emma meant everything to me. My addictions, my choices, they kept me from protecting her. I never thought myself as a bad person, but I made devastating mistakes. Mistakes I'll carry for the rest of my life. It was an acknowledgement that Emma's story involved multiple failures. The system that didn't adequately intervene in Zachary's abusive childhood. The father whose own demons kept him from being the parent Emma needed. The simple, tragic unlocked door that allowed evil to walk in. The lasting questions. Emma Miller's story forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about trust, safety, and the vulnerability of children. How do we protect our children when danger can come from the most unexpected places? How do we balance our natural human tendency to trust our neighbors with the reality that predators often hide in plain sight? And perhaps most troubling, how many Zacharys are out there, product of failed systems and childhood trauma, walking around in our communities right now? There are no easy answers. Emma's case exposed failures at multiple levels. Child welfare systems that documented problems but didn't intervene effectively. Communities that didn't see warning signs. Families struggling with their own demons. But it also revealed something else. The incredible resilience of a little girl who survived abuse, who kept smiling, who loved her family to the moon and back. Emma deserved so much more than the 6 years she got. She deserved to grow up, to graduate, to fall in love, to become the person she was meant to be. Instead, her life was cut short by someone who was supposed to keep her safe, the purple ribbons. Today, if you drive through that Bentonville neighborhood, you might still see purple ribbons tied to fences and trees. Reminders of a little girl who brought light into the world. Her former classmates are now young adults. They carry memories of a kindergarten friend who disappeared one terrible night. Sarah, Emma's mother, continues to raise Emma's younger sister Lily. In interviews, she's spoken about the impossible task of explaining to a toddler why her big sister isn't coming home. I'm going to keep loving my other ones, Sarah said through tears after the trial. I'm going to keep going on as a mom. Keeping on with my little girls. That resilience, that determination to survive and protect her remaining children, mirrors the strength Emma showed throughout her own short life. What this case teaches us. Emma's story isn't just about one tragedy in one small Arkansas town. It's a reminder that we must remain vigilant, that we cannot assume safety based on familiarity, that background checks, awareness, and careful vetting matter, even for people we think we know. It's also a call to action for better child welfare systems. Both Emma and Zachary were failed by systems designed to protect children. Emma's early abuse should have resulted in more permanent intervention. Zachary's childhood trauma should have triggered more aggressive support services. When we fail to protect and help troubled children, we don't just harm them, we potentially create future perpetrators. This isn't about excusing Zachary's actions. Nothing can excuse what he did. But understanding the cycle of trauma and how it creates predators is essential if we want to prevent future tragedies. The question that haunts. There's one question that everyone who followed this case asked themselves. Could this have been prevented? If Zachary had received proper intervention as a child, would he have become the person who killed Emma? If Emma's father had successfully overcome his addictions earlier, would a family have been in that neighborhood at all? If Sarah had locked her door that night, would Zachary have been able to enter? These questions have no definitive answers, but they matter because they force us to think about prevention, not just punishment. They remind us that evil doesn't appear out of nowhere. It's often cultivated through neglect, trauma, and missed opportunities for intervention. Final call to action, 48:00, 50:00. As we close this story, I want you to think about something. How well do you really know the people around you? Your neighbors, the people you trust with your children, the familiar faces in your community? This isn't about becoming paranoid or distrustful. It's about being aware, being cautious, being protective of those who can't protect themselves. Emma's story matters because it could happen anywhere. Bentonville, Arkansas isn't some crime-ridden city. It's a quiet town just like thousands of others across America. Southeast, a street looked like any street in any suburb. Evil doesn't announce itself. It doesn't wear a sign. Sometimes it wears a friendly face and offers to help watch your kids. Here's what I want you to do. Drop a comment below answering this question. What's one safety measure you're going to implement in your own home or with your own family after hearing this story? Maybe it's better locks. Maybe it's being more selective about babysitters. Maybe it's having harder conversations with your children about who they can trust. Whatever it is, share in the comments. Let's learn from Emma's tragedy and protect other children. And if this story affected you the way it affected me, if you think it's important for other people to hear it, hit that like button and share this video. For those of you who want to understand more cases like this, I've got another video coming next week about a case that's even more complex. It involves a mother who disappeared, a husband who seemed perfect, and a twist that nobody saw coming. Click the link that just appeared on your screen or check the description below to make sure you don't miss it. Before you go, I want to hear from you. Do you think Zachary's traumatic childhood should have been considered more heavily in sentencing? Do you believe the death penalty is appropriate in cases like this? What do you think could have been done differently to prevent this tragedy? These are hard questions with no easy answers, but they're worth discussing. Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one, and I genuinely want to know what you think. And finally, to everyone who watched this entire story, thank you. Thank you for bearing witness to Emma's life. Thank you for not looking away from difficult truths. And thank you for helping keep her memory alive. Emma Miller was more than a victim. She was a daughter, a sister, a kindergartner who loved purple and had the biggest smile. She was a little girl who survived abuse and found joy anyway, who loved her family to the moon and back. She deserved better than what happened to her. And the best way we can honor her memory is by making sure we learn from her story, by protecting other children, and by never forgetting that behind every true crime case is a real person whose life mattered. Purple ribbons for Emma. Rest in peace, sweet girl. If you found this video meaningful, make sure you're subscribed to the channel with notifications turned on. We cover cases that matter, stories that need to be told, and we do it with respect for the victims and their families. See you in the next one.